Welcome to the fifth edition of the Rich and Kevin podcast. I'm Kevin Shields. This is my co-host, Rich Burhell. And today we have a special guest, man of many talents, also my brother, Patrick Shields.
Coffee drinker.
Hey, Pat, how you doing?
Coffee drinker.
I heard you had a big win today in soccer. It looks like, I know you're a fan of the national team and the New York City Football Club. And the national team had a couple of big wins, and it looks like your NY City Football Club won today. You were at the game?
We were. Well, we weren't. Becky's on call, so I had to go out to, pardon me, rainy, windy New Jersey by myself. Where am I looking? Am I looking into your? Is that the correct eye line there? Am I?
Yep.
Good. So yeah, we have our team has struggled this year, as you know.
Right.
And today's win puts us back into the above the playoff line, as it were.
All right.
So if we can win a couple more, we'll probably sneak in as a wild card. But who knows? Maybe get one playoff game in. So how are you boys doing?
They won a championship a couple years ago, right?
In 2021 against Portland Timbers at Providence Park in Portland. I was there. It was another rainy, windy day, but pretty good.
For anybody who doesn't know, Pat mentioned Becky. Becky is Pat's wife.
Yes.
And Pat, let's go back to the beginning. We'd like to know a little bit about you, like how you grew up, where you went to school, what was it like for you growing up in Cleveland, and just kind of a timeline of the beginnings.
Yeah. Well, born in 1963, and as I understand it, I was the first of our 9 brothers and sisters who was born when we were living in the house on East Boulevard.
Right, Garfield Heights.
Now Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure, I'm not certain, but I think Kathleen was born when the family was still living on Gaylord, over by where our cousins lived. Lived there until high school, when, as you know, our father started to lose his eyesight because of retinopathy, and so we had to move closer to his office up on Turney Road in Garfield Heights so that he could walk to work or be driven to work to his little office there across the street from the Turney Town Mini Mall shopping center. And then I believe we moved there in 1978, which was the year my first year in high school, because I know I started high school. I started high school while we were still living on the boulevard, and then began my sophomore year up in Garfield Heights over there by the recreation center. Went to St. Ignatius High School in Cleveland after Holy Name Elementary, as the rest of the family did down in the Harvard neighborhood.
As did Rich and I.
Yeah. And then on to Kenyon College after high school, and pretty much after my sophomore year in college, I was more or less gone from Cleveland, because I spent a couple summers on campus. One working at a soccer camp. The first one working on campus in and around the Kenyon Festival Theater, which was a theater that existed at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And then one summer working as a paid intern for my college coach's soccer camp, and then had to leave Kenyon for a couple semesters. Basically, just as you know, we all pretty much paid our own way through high school and college, so took a couple semesters off to work, and finished a semester late, but ended up taking my final collegiate semester away at the National Theater Institute at the O'Neill Theater Center in Waterford, Connecticut.
Wow.
And then moved directly from there down here into New York City. So in December of '85, I took the lease on the apartment because just to be able to hold it for my next semester. An old college friend was keeping half of the apartment in Brooklyn, so I had to keep it for December through May when I finished up at the O'Neill, and then moved in when I finished up at the O'Neill. Came straight down to New York City, and started auditioning and performing here and there, and off Broadway shows. People sometimes mistake what Broadway and off Broadway mean. Those are actually terminology for contracts. They're not places, but
Oh,
off Broadway is a more relevant designation, a truer designation, because it doesn't really. None of those theaters, the small theaters I worked in, are on or off Broadway. But again, off Broadway and Broadway are the actual names of the contracts for those
okay. That's good to know.
for those houses. And then let's see. Oh my gosh! Then in '86, when I moved in, I had a job waiting for me when I got here, working as a parking attendant.
Mhm.
And the gentleman who was a college friend basically just forgot that I was showing up. So I came into work one day in my little suit and arrived, and he said, I gave away your job. I forgot you were coming today.
Oh, no.
So suddenly I without a job, on the ground with my student loans, coming due. And during a few of the summers in Cleveland, I had worked as a window cleaner. I'm not sure if you knew the story of how this came about, but how I started.
No, I did not.
It didn't actually start in New York City. It started in Cleveland.
Okay.
When I found out I got into Kenyon, I realized I had to raise a little more money than I would have had I landed at Bowling Green or Michigan, the other two of the other schools of the three others that I got into. So I was still trying to decide.
Right.
But once I decided, I really knew I wanted to go there. I realized I had to raise about twice the money. So I went to Dad. Our father was an attorney, and I knew some high school friends of mine had been working downtown in Cleveland at the clerk's office for various judges, working for the bailiffs.
Mm.
And those jobs paid about twice what I was earning as what we all had earned as lifeguards.
Right.
So I asked Dad if he could, spook around and see if he could find me a job downtown. And he said, well, I'll get back to you in a week or so. A couple weeks later, he comes back to me and he said, I'll do you one better. He said, one of my customers who owes me some money runs a window cleaning crew out of a union shop downtown. And so he got me a gig with those guys, and I lasted on the rigs and on the scaffolding for maybe a month at the beginning of the summer. That first summer I worked for them, and the guys really they drank hard. This was still like the cocaine era, and they would go in and finish their 8 man hours in 4 hours and go straight to the bar. And I usually would go off and go run. It was summer, so I tried to keep fit for for fall soccer and track and field.
Right.
So I would go over to Trinity High School and run on the track when we got done. But occasionally, the guys that I was working with would fall asleep out on the rig. Like, do you remember Erie Plaza, where everybody used to go up to the top and have their prom dinners at the end of the year?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So that was one of our contracts. And if you know how a scaffold rig works. Back in those days, they weren't the grasshopper, the rigs that spin around and are permanently fixed to the tops of the buildings.
Right.
Back then, you had a motor on this side and a motor on this side, and so we're both running a little motor, and he would be falling asleep or super hungover, and as we were going down, the rig would start to air on my side a little bit.
Wow.
And so I realized that it was going to be trouble, and then one of the guys I worked with and I had to go do some bosun chair work on a building. And on those buildings, we would put a little carpet over the edge of the roof, run the ropes over the carpet so that they wouldn't be getting stressed on the concrete. And then whoever was on the chair would go down, and the other guy would be up on top and look down. And so one day, this guy Tim I was working with was shouting up to me, he said, "Hey, is that rope threading?" I looked all the way over the top, and I saw that it was threading, and only a little bit was left. And I just started yelling, "Down, down, down!" And he made his way to the bottom. And I went to the boss that day, and I was like, "Look, these guys aren't checking the ropes. They're not, they're falling asleep. They're always coming in hungover. I need to do something else."
Right.
So he put me on a route crew, as we called it, and so we would go out and we would do houses. We would take ladders, and if you know how window cleaning ladders work, they're called sectionals. So you take one, put it on top of another, take those two, put them on top of another. So we would go and we would run all the banks for a certain bank, and the next day we would go do a couple houses in Gates Mills and Hunting Valley or Shaker Heights, mostly East Side routes that I ran. We did all the interior windows on the stores on Beechwood Mall once a morning. Anyway, point was that I had residential experience. So when I found out that my job wasn't waiting for me in New York, I started calling window cleaning companies and asking them if they had jobs for me. And one guy called, said, "Can you come in today?" It was summer, it was busy. So I got in there, and he asked me if I knew how to do belt work. That's the safety harness that you wrap around your belt, and then it clips onto the two hooks that are outside the window.
Right.
And I lied. I said yes, absolutely, I can do that. And so he hands me a belt, and it turns out there were belt windows in his office, and I was like, "Okay, I'll go do it." And so he could see that I was struggling trying to climb out, and he knew that I hadn't done it, and he's like, "All right, look, I'll teach you." So for the rest of that month, he and the crew taught me how to do belt work, because New York hadn't had a lot of replacement windows yet, so we were still doing a lot of safety harness work. But remember, before I said it was the Coke era, and a couple of the guys on the crew were like, he had one crackhead. There was another guy who did a lot of coke. The boss himself was a super big cokehead, and I found out later, after I quit them, and I quit them because one of the guys stole from me, that the boss got arrested because he was dealing coke between New York and New Jersey, and they arrested him one day coming out of the Holland Tunnel. So that was it. So I started my own business because one of the guys, the same guy that stole from me, also stole from one of the buildings that we worked in regularly, and the superintendent of that building, who I had become friendly with, came to me and said, "Do you want the building? I need somebody I can trust who's not going to steal." A lot of famous people in the building.
Right.
And so the business was born. So I had enough business in that building alone. It was a high rise up on West 67th on the Upper West Side, to kind of get me through the rest of that summer. And then so now this is August of 1986. So from then until probably about 90, I just worked nonstop. I would work, and while I was working, I would go and drop off my card with the building superintendent here or there on the Upper East Side. And then by about 90, I had enough customers to get me through and hire a few guys. And then by 93, I had my student loans paid off. And when I say I worked those 6 years nonstop, 7 days a week, no breaks. You guys never saw me. I never came home.
Right.
And then, of course, in the middle of that time, I was also performing and auditioning and doing shows. But I also had, as you know, had become a young widower. And so by the end of that period, I was just exhausted, still very sad, of course. And so I just decided to just start focusing on the business and take some time off and write, go live in Los Angeles for a little while, and just get my head back together. I was, let's just say, I was temperamentally unsuited for being in rehearsal, much less just being around other people generally. But when something like that happens, it just you develop a short fuse. You begin to lack patience, and I just needed to get away, and so I did. My good friend Ivor ran the New York business while I was gone, and I opened up another shop out in Los Angeles and ran that while I was out there. So I was there part-time from 91 to 93. During the New York winter season, I would go out there and work. And then 93 through 96, I lived out there full time. And then I felt ready to come back and uh, start auditioning again. I was writing quite a bit more, joined the board of a film festival there in Cleveland. And then around 99, 2000, started working I did a lot of trade shows in LA working for a company called Movie Magic. I would help set up their trade shows in New York. So I got very involved at that time in video compression, and then started writing webisodics for other people, and then ended up producing what ended up being the first serialized webisodic in New York City in 1999 and 2000. That was
And what's a webisodic?
it was called The New Guard. I had written something for someone else, but then production fell apart. But I had more or less a cast and a couple locations still together. So I just spent 3 days, wrote around 100 pages, wrote about 10 page episodes, and then cast them, got some people from the O'Neill, where I graduated from the National Theater Institute, cast some actors in New York through Backstage Magazine, shot that, put it online at my friend's website, and then the website went dead, and so then I just let it go. And now I've recut it, and so now I'm using it to pitch as a TV pilot.
Great.
That was called The New Guard. That's on YouTube. You can find it there.
Yeah, was that when you started Clear Window Productions?
Yeah, just after that.
Okay.
So because I didn't have a production entity at that time, in 2002, I guess, 2001, 2002, I started doing the corporate work to create Clear Window Productions, and then spent the next 6 years, just selling hats and mugs and making sure to have invoices for billings so that I could get the trademark for Clear Window, which I still have. And so now, named after Shields Window Cleaning, of course, Clear Window Productions is now my production entity. And then during that whole period, I just did a whole bunch of other stuff. I produced stuff for other people. I produced the New York run of a small musical. I wrote a ton. I wrote a script called White Flight about the neighborhood that we grew up in, and then just really, really focused on the window cleaning and work. Met Becky in 2006, started dating, moved in together in 2008. That was back when I was still down in Greenwich Village. I'd moved into the village in 1993. And then, I don't know, around maybe 2011 or 12, I really started feeling the pinch, like I wanted to start performing again. So I told the guys that I was starting to think about it, that I would give them a 2 years notice when I was going to shut the business. And then in Brazil in 2014, Becky and I met this couple who we wanted to make a documentary about, and spent a couple years trying to work with them and talk them into it. And so round about that time when they said yes, I decided to tell the guys, I'm going to shut the business at the end of 2018. I'm going to start performing again now, and we're going to start shooting the documentary now. This was in 2017.
Right.
And then, so by the end of 2018, the window cleaning was officially shut down. I told the guys, end of 2015, beginning of 2016, start getting your new jobs together. And I always promised them I'd give them a full 2 years notice. So Shields Window Cleaning, 1986 to 2018. Clear Window Productions existed as an entity from 2002 on. And then in 2017, during the last year that I was closing the business, I started auditioning again just so I could start to get my sea legs back and get back on set. I started working on pretty much started working as a background performer on pretty much every film and TV show in New York City. And in end of 2017, booked a gig on the TV show Billions, and was with that show as what's called a core player. I don't know if you know what that means. It's when you see shows like any kind of procedural, like a cop procedural, you always see the same cops. If you're in an office, you always see the same people walking around the background that populate the office, and they're walking around and handing each other things. It's basically just silent choreography, and you're mimicking talking. So
Okay.
Okay.
the sound didn't go out there, but
Yeah, I thought I lost you.
no. That's what we do.
Okay.
That's what background players do. You pretend like you're talking. You make sure you have quiet shoes, and you do this little dance that they set up during rehearsal, and then you shoot it from a bunch of different angles, and then after about 16 hours, you go home. So I was on Billions for 5 years, learned a ton. I mean, I obviously had been on sets, but it's a different beast now. It's much more of a much more of a machine than it was, back in the 80s and 90s. It was a great learning experience, to the point where I'm confident saying that there's no set anywhere on the world that I couldn't walk onto right now because of what I learned as
Wow.
a core background player. It really was helpful.
Yeah.
So yeah, Kev. So my New York life is basically, my first apartment was in Brooklyn, in a neighborhood called Carroll Gardens, with my college friend who was a year ahead of me, and then another college friend of mine and I bounced around after that to about 5 or 6 different apartments on the Upper West Side and Upper East Side, and then I was in the apartment, two different apartments when I was married, and then in '93 gave up my big, beautiful, cheap Upper East Side apartment, and moved into a 390 square foot. You could call it a one-bedroom apartment in the West Village, in Greenwich Village, and then was there until 2015, when Becky and I moved here into the building we live in now, which is a 2-building complex near Times Square called Manhattan Plaza. So I live in Midtown now.
Right. So, Pat, during this time, you've done a lot of film work,
Yeah.
and writing and that type of thing. So you mentioned the 2 people that you started talking with about doing a documentary. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I've always gone to World Cups ever since the '90s, and now it's become a gigantic thing for Becky and I, even more than I used to do when I used to just go to the Cup and do a little bit of side travel. Becky and I, and she's an amazing expert planner. We now always do the World Cup, both men's and women's, and I do the ticketing, and then she plans a big side trek. So, for instance, 2010, we went to South Africa to the Cup, and then she planned the side trek to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. So we summited Kilimanjaro and went all over South Africa and Nairobi and Kenya and Tanzania. 2014, we did a big blast deep into the rainforest, the Amazon rainforest in Brazil. 2018, we went to Russia. Of course, the men didn't qualify, but we went anyway.
Right.
We were already with and shooting with our friends, Mark and Leela, who go dressed to the games as Eagleman and Wonder Woman.
Yeah, I saw a picture of them the other day.
Yeah, we met them deep in Manaus in the jungle, in Manaus being the Amazonas capital, in 2014. And just something hit it off, and then we saw them at a bunch of games after that, but we became very intrigued by their personal story. He and I share a long time love of soccer, from back in from the late '60s through the early '70s, and played as kids and followed it as kids.
Right.
And his wife has this unbelievable immigrant story of how she got to the United States. Ethnic Chinese, born in Malaysia. She and her sister came over here as teenagers to go to school and get an education. Then she and Mark met in college. He joined the Air Force, became a doctor. They traveled all over the world, always managing to find American games, a friendly match in Poland or another match. And then Mark and Leela in 2014, I believe that was the first Cup that they started going in costume. So by 2014, they become very well known. And Mark also had begun to deal with his early onset Parkinson's diagnosis.
Wow.
And I mean, this guy's got an iron will, extraordinary human beings, both of them. And he basically said, I'm not going to let this define me. And he's just gone on living his life normally.
Right.
and continuing to travel. And so we've gone to them. We've gone with them to qualifying matches and overseas since 2017. We wrapped production last year. I wrapped production in Costa Rica, and then
So you're talking about the documentary that you're doing about
yeah.
Mark Landa.
Yeah, so we wrapped production, and now we're just getting ready to start fundraising for post production. So we're already editing, but we're going to need money. We're going to need more money for graphics and
Right.
color correction. So I did a not a Kickstarter. I did an Indiegogo fundraiser, but I put it up a little early. We didn't have as much time while we were in Australia and New Zealand as we thought. So I'm actually going to be relaunching it again this coming week.
Right.
So the working title is Eagle Man and Wonder Woman: An America Love Story, and we're still on track to have it done for first cut for spring 2024. Then we'll basically spend all of 2024 doing virtual private screenings, screenings for sale, taking it to film festivals. Your cousin Jim Okar is doing the music. He's an insanely talented film composer and guitarist and pianist and technical whiz. He's really quite good. He and I have worked together several times before.
Great.
On short films and some other things. And he did the music for the New Guard back in 2000. So it's been nice to reconnect with him here in New York.
Right.
So that documentary is half complete. We're just starting post, and then I'm starting to work on the second while we're going into post. So while we're finishing post production on that one, I'm doing pre-production on what will be the next one, which is going to be a look at my old friend Matthew Quashie, or Mike Quashie, who around New York City was known as the Limbo King. So the second one will be a documentary about Mike's life, him knowing Jimi Hendrix, but also what happened to him after he got older, when he was taken advantage of by individuals who stole from him and stuff like that. So it's going to be kind of an interesting look at how an incredibly talented human being was taken advantage of by both basically by this indigent woman who knows a little bit about how to file stuff, and in court got her claws into him as a health proxy and power of attorney, the old story, and then tried to have him declared incompetent when he asked for a new proxy, and then took all this valuable Jimi Hendrix related stuff and a Jimmy Page stuff like that. So doc number 2 is going to be about Mike, but the longer term plan is now that I've become pension vested. Through my background work, it's going to free me to open up and audition a little more widely, get back into class, and start trying to recarve out a second career as an actor. So that'll be the prime focus from here on in, outside of the 2 docs.
Great.
Wow.
Hey, Pat, are you feeling the pinch from the writer's strike?
Oh, very much so. I haven't worked since May 30th.
Wow.
That's funny you ask. I was just before we got on, I was looking at the texts. My union, I'm a member of both Actors Equity and the Screen Actors Guild, and our union is keeping us abreast of what's going on with the Writers Guild, and fingers crossed, Writers Guild could be settled tonight or tomorrow. They could settle on contract language,
Right.
which put me back to work because SAG-AFTRA is on strike.
Right.
So we all always thought that the Writers Guild contract would come first, and then the SAG-AFTRA contract. Our issues are a little bit different. Our AI issues are slightly different. Ours are about our person, whereas theirs are about words and writing and scripts.
Right.
So I'm guessing that either Writers Guild getting settled is going to help ours get settled immediately, or ours is going to go on for a few more months. So, no, everybody's feeling the pinch. Nobody's working. None of the ancillary service people are working. lighting people, the grips, the
Right.
the trucks, the truckers, IATSE, Teamsters, hair and makeup, food service. No, nobody's been working since July, really.
Wow.
And
Wow.
my last day, Billions wrapped on May 30th. So
And that's the last season of Billions, right?
yeah. No, it's done. And I had 2 days on another show set for mid-June, but those ended up getting productions just started pulling back because they saw that the strike was going to happen. The SAG-AFTRA contract was not up until June 30th, and then they extended it till July 12th for a couple more weeks to talk. But the talks were not substantive, and so we've been on strike since midnight on July 12th. But I
Right.
haven't had SAG-AFTRA work since May 30th when we wrapped Billions.
So if the Screen Actors Guild sells theirs, then you go back to work immediately.
It depends.
Okay.
Writers Guild, they'll get back to work quickly. Like the late night shows, those guys can be back to work in a day or two. They're just
Right.
writing that night. Certainly, there are a lot of scripts that are already written. Toward the end of the Writers Guild contract, basically, scripts that were done or near completion were done so that they would be getting into the pipeline so that
Right.
no writing was done, so that no one was crossing the picket line after the Writers Guild went on strike. So that can turn pretty quickly. There's tons of scripts ready to go.
Okay.
For the whole thing for SAG, and it's not Screen Actors Guild anymore, just FYI. Screen Actors Guild years ago merged with AFTRA, which was the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists.
Right.
So now and people still refer to it as SAG or Screen Actors Guild, but in truth, it's actually called SAG-AFTRA now. SAG-AFTRA.
Okay.
It's a combined.
Right.
It's a combined two guilds. So the turnaround can happen, pretty quickly. Certainly within a month, production can be back up and running. I'm guessing as quick as 2 weeks.
Right.
But both the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild have to be back because neither will cross the other's picket line.
Right.
So Pat, you look like you're in great shape. Like, do you work out a lot or
I'm still a runner.
really?
Yeah, I still I don't play recreational soccer like I used to, but next I run marathons occasionally, but I run normally and swim. But I've always been a track and field guy, so I'll always run something, even if it's just a mile here or 2 miles there. But it definitely remains my go-to exercise. And I ran the New York City Marathon in 1994, which was the 50th running of the marathon. And then I ran it again 25 years later. I'm sorry, that was the 25th. The 1994 was the 25th. And then the pandemically rescheduled 50th was 2021. So I decided a few years before that my goal was going to be to run the 25th, the 50th, and the 75th.
Wow.
So if I can keep it going, I'll be 83 when the 75th New York City Marathon happens. So I'm hoping to be the sole member of that club.
Wow. That's
But,
great.
so I ran those two, and then again in 2022. I didn't get in 2023. Becky and I both are marathoning regularly now. But I did get into something called the virtual marathon for this year. And so I have to train. And in the week before the New York City Marathon, one of the days within a 24-hour period, you have to run a marathon. And
Right.
you can run a 23-hour marathon. You can run and walk and run and walk. It doesn't matter how you do it. But you use the app, and the app connects to the New York City Road Runners Club. And so they're aware that you did it. If you do the virtual, and there are only a certain number of slots, and I was able to get one this year, that gives you an automatic berth into 2024. So I will, presuming I finish this in October, I will run the 2024 marathon again.
Nice.
So yeah, I'm big into keeping the blood pressure down and
Yeah.
keeping the weight off, and it's definitely true what they say about they say the camera puts some weight on your face, and it does. So I want to stay fit so I can, so I can work as a performer. I'm really itching to get back on stage, and you certainly have to have, fit, health and fitness, and you got to be there every night and ready to go. So I'd like to be doing that for the next.
Yeah, you did a couple plays at the O'Neill, right?
Yeah, well, the O'Neill, I was in school. I
Okay.
never performed there. The only time I ever performed there outside of school was something called the Young Playwrights Conference. So the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center up in Waterford houses a whole bunch of different programs. It has a program for actors that's multidisciplinary called the National Theater Institute. That's what I attended. During the summer, it houses the National Playwrights Conference and the National Music Theater Conference, which is fairly new. It houses an institute for puppetry arts.
Oh wow.
Like all the puppeteers who created Avenue Q, they all came out of the O'Neill puppetry program. That's so weird. Here's a weird story. So one of the students who was in the puppeteer program, what I was, we call each other knits. So if you went to National Theater Institute, you're a knit. So if you ever meet a fellow knit, there's a special knit handshake. There's not a special knit game. Anyway, but one of the puppeteering students from my semester was the second alternate to go up as the teacher in the Challenger, in the space shuttle.
Oh wow.
And I remember we were in class that morning, and someone came over from the office. We were in our morning stretch, whatever time it was, before class. We always had to have a morning, kind of like a yoga stretch.
Right.
And somebody came over and whispered into her ear, and she just screamed in like crying, bawling pain. It was just so extraordinary. And then they canceled the class and took her off to talk to whoever she needed to call, because she knew people in the program. Because the alternates trained up to a certain point.
Right.
And the first alternate trains right up until the last week or 2 weeks before.
Right.
And so, what was the teacher's name? Krista McAuliffe? Was it Krista?
Right. Yes.
So she was the second alternate. One of my classmates up there that year.
Wow.
That was a weird semester. So the O'Neill has the National Playwrights Conference, which is one of my goals as an actor. I want to work Shakespeare in the Park someday. I want to work the National Playwrights Conference as a performer. I'd really like to work in Cleveland, in a regional house, either in a touring show or in something there. So I have 4 or 5 things that are on my bucket list, but the pandemic has definitely put a dent in being able to get back on stage now that I've started doing it again.
Right.
That first year and a half was just impossible. So I'm doing as many staged readings. Anytime there's an opportunity to go do what's called an EPA audition, it's basically a cattle call for union members, but I go do those nonstop just to stay sharp audition wise. I'm doing one tomorrow morning. I'll be there at 7:00. So the goal is to get back on stage as quickly as possible. The pandemic halted everybody's plan, and for me, it's a whole different new life, second life as a performer plan.
Right.
I always stayed close. I always was doing something or producing for somebody or writing something for somebody, but until I really felt just emotionally ready to really jump back in,
Right.
I didn't do it. I didn't want to do it until I was one, absolutely certain, and two, 100% ready, and then lucked out and got billions. So I was on a set, constantly for 5 years, and what a set it was! Oh my God, it was great.
Right.
It was just so great. Being on that set was so much fun, so demanding, just so extraordinary in so many ways. So many of those performers were, TV and stage actors at the absolute top of their game. Maggie Siff, who just did stage here in New York this summer. Kelly Aucoin, oh my gosh, Daniel K. Isaac, who's starting to kill it. You've all seen you've seen Breaking Bad. Do you remember
Right.
the guy who played the chemist? He was kind of like the Weasley chemist who was in Making the Blue Ice.
Right.
David Costabile, the great David Costabile, fantastic actor. But you really, when you see these guys and gals working on set, you understand that you have to bring your A game
Right.
every day, all the time. And when I say they bring it, they don't just bring it. They bring it for 12 hours, 14 hours, take after take after take after take, and they're going full steam ahead all day, every day from 5:30 in the morning till sometimes 10:30 at night. People don't really understand how production works. People make these Hollywood jokes and production is this, but the reality is, think of it this way, like we make widgets, we make units for sale. It's no different than making a car or making putting something together. Production is extremely difficult, extremely long, extremely skilled labor, and it's long, exhausting days, and people don't understand how production really works. It's no different than any other assembly and any other assembly line, except that you get to use your craft while you're working on this assembly line. And sometimes that craft is movie magic or outrageous and creative performances. It's seeing guest stars come through. Richard Thomas, who's one of the best stage actors New York has ever seen. People of course know him as John Boy in the Waltons. Suddenly you turn over and there he is for 2 days on a 5-day week.
Let me ask you, Pat. You were talking
Yeah.
about production, and
Yeah.
and how the actors bring it. 10 hours a day. And so, and I never really thought about this until you just said it. But like, you watch a movie for an hour and a half or so, but there's probably amazing performances in making that movie for hundreds of hours that you never see, probably, right?
Oh, yeah.
That get cut out.
I mean, in one sense, yes, because the term what gets left on the cutting room floor is one thing, but in TV it's a little bit different because it's so tightly rehearsed in the morning. So what they do is they come in, they do a master, they do sometimes a private rehearsal, and then a rehearsal, and the stand-ins, as if you work as a stand-in, and I do sometimes, you come in and you do a rehearsal where you watch the scene all the way through with the principals, and then the principals go away and the stand-ins come in and take their place, and so then they build the lighting and move everything. And so for instance, if I stand in for Kelly Aucoin, who plays Dollar Bill, you get there at the beginning, you watch everything he does, from him moving forward a little bit to putting his hand down on the table and making a point for emphasis. They light differently for this than they do for this.
Right.
So you come in and you basically do his performance, and they set up the lighting and everything around you, and then they come in and then they shoot the master, and then everybody goes away again, and then they do it, and they'll do maybe a 2-shot of 2 of the characters in the scene, and then 2 others, and then 2 others. They change the lens, move everything around, change the lighting, and then they'll come in and do the close-ups on each of the performers. So they're playing the same scene the same way the entire time, but with the same intensity every time, hour after hour after hour, no matter how tired they get, no matter how hungry you get.
Wow.
And you got to be there, and you got to be on. It's
Yeah, because you got a lot of different people working at the same time, so you can't, like, one person can't just say, okay, wait, I need a break for a half hour or so.
Yeah, if you see a scene where there's 25 background on the set and 6 or 7 of the principal players, off around what you can't see is another 200 people.
Wow.
They're everywhere, and they find little pockets of places to hide. So the last thing they do is they look at the frame and make sure, like, nobody shouldn't be there. Or if it's a period piece, like, hey, that Herman Miller chair, what's that doing there? Someone was sitting in it. A coffee cup that's not supposed to be that somebody left on a table during a break. The continuity has to be right. There can't be something that was not there before. It's an absolute perfectionist game, and to see it working at the highest level has been such a privilege, and so so amazing a learning opportunity. Coming out the back end of it, I felt more than ever before like I just want to live on set now. I want to do it every day for the rest of my life. I'm so
Great.
jealous of it, and just gonna keep doing it until I get there.
Nice. I was just gonna say that's the and then and I imagine like the editing part is probably a whole another project. You know, after everything is shot, then you got the editors that are going through it and putting things together and the audio and all that, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. If you're in season, if it's a normal season, that tape is dropped off, or they're working on it that night. They're always editing. They're always working. It's funny. A friend of mine has edited a couple TV shows, and he's just like, look, when I go in, he's like, I'm the same as the actors. I'm making a 5-month commitment where I know I'm barely going to be leaving the studio. I'll be working when I get home. If there's anything changed or something goes wrong or the color goes off or maybe legal weighs in and says, well, that you can't really use that word, or and then you have to do a reshoot. It's a constant game, and watching not just editors but script supervisors, like the people on set whose job it is to keep continuity, are amazing. They're amazing to watch. And the woman who had that job on Billions was stunningly good at her job. It was
Wow.
like one of the great things is I didn't just have to watch the actors or the lighting or the directors of photography. I always paid close attention to anybody involved with the script or script supervision, continuity. Watching them do their job and learning how from them to do it is just going to make you technically better at your job, because there is a whole lot of technical expertise necessary for working on set, on camera. The other thing that people just think it's so easy, but the reality is it is it's a game of millimeters. It's really, really tightly run and fun and wonderful and great. Oh God,
Hey,
I
Pat.
will go back.
We usually ask our guests who are your top 4 favorite musicians.
Oh,
But I'm
boy.
going to open it up. I'm going to open it up with you, and I'm going to ask you, who are your top 4 favorite artists?
What media are we talking about here? Can we say?
Well, we usually do music.
Boy, well, let's see. These questions are always hard for me because I'm not a person who is known for, having influences at and I really embrace the term eclectic. I don't have any expertise in anything, but
Right.
if I had to off the cuff pick my top 4 musical artists, I'm a rock and roller, so
Right.
in no particular order.
Okay.
Jimmy Page, Jimi Hendrix, huge Joan Jett fan.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, I love Joan Jett.
Yeah. She's still rocking.
And then let me think. Oh my goodness. If I had to pick 4, Page, Plant, Jett, Hendrix.
That's great.
I'm sorry. Page, Jett, Hendrix. I'm gonna knock Plant out of my top 4. I think. Let me chew on that while we're talking. I'll come back.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else?
I was gonna
before we
say,
wrap it up that you want to talk about?
well, okay, I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but I know you guys are big Bruce Springsteen fans, right?
Yeah. Huge fan of the Boss.
Yeah.
Seen a couple of his New Year's Eve shows. Not my top 5 though. I
But
might have to dip into. You know what? It's gonna have to be a jazz saxophone player. I'm gonna go.
I thought you'd go towards jazz.
I'm gonna roll with Charles Mingus. Is gonna
There
be
you
my
go.
number 4.
Oh, that's good. So what's it been like just like New York City? I mean, sounds like an amazing place to live.
Yeah, it's. I knew I wanted to live here when I was 5.
Wow.
That dream, yeah, I remember when we were kids. I think we went up to New Haven to see Bill up at Yale.
Right.
And I just remember going down Wall Street and seeing the cathedral, one of the cathedrals at the end of the block, and just thinking, I love this place. I want to live here. And then pretty much by the time I was end of my freshman year in college, I knew I was going to make the move. I just didn't know when. Um, People really, you know, it's like I said before about the kind of things that people say about uh, you know big Hollywood and that kind of nonsense. People have the same opinions about New York City, and the reality is it's a city of immigrants from all over the world, but also immigrants from all over the country. So when people give New York guff, it's like my next door neighbor's from Oklahoma. My next door neighbor on the other side grew up in the building here in New York City. The other kid down the hall, is from Portland, Oregon. Everybody's from somewhere, from Pittsburgh, or um, it was crazy back in the '80s. Uh, as in any large urban location, you're gonna have different issues with drugs and crime, and
Hmm.
certainly during the heyday of crack, which made people very violent here. There were drive-by shootings just like there were in LA. So the first 7 or 8 years were pretty tough.
Wow.
Yeah, you had to watch your back on the subway. You didn't you didn't wear chains. You never took your wallet out. It was
Hmm.
just any place where you can be vulnerable, particularly on a subway where you're stuck in a train car. There's a vulnerability there. Um, 90s were that was my decade where I was kind of split between New York and LA, and I enjoyed them both equally. Love LA. I don't know when people in New York say, "Oh, I hate LA." All right, I'm going to go talk to somebody else because I love LA. I love New York and I love LA. Um, and then of course, September 11th, changed everything. I mean, we it changed the way we had to move around our neighborhoods. It changed it changed the way people think about safety and security. People always forget that they tried to bomb the World Trade Center in '93.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like it was the first effort. Here, we were hyper aware of that. It was like someone
Right.
tried to bring down the World Trade Center from below. It wasn't like this big surprise on September 11th. Um, so at that time, I was living down. I was still in the West Village at the time. So my building was just off Sixth Avenue, and so as the plane was, you could hear the plane coming because
Wow.
it turned from the west and came straight down Sixth Avenue toward the towers, which was just 10 blocks south of me. And you heard this zoom. You could hear the roar coming, and then you just hear it go past, and the building shook. My building actually shook, and I pick up the phone and I called my neighbor and I said, Joe, I got his answering machine. I think he still has the tape. I said, I'm pretty sure a plane is going down in Manhattan, but the weird thing was it sounded like the engine was going full throttle, and right as I was about to say throttle, I heard the punch.
Hmm.
Wow.
Heard it, and then of course knew instantly what was going on, and went outside and looked from Sixth Avenue, and went back. I lived just a block away, so I could look down and see it. We saw the second one on TV, and I had to work that morning, so I had to get out of the house and go get my employees who were on a job uptown because we all knew the subway was going to be out. So I called. I called home. I think I got a hold of Matt and Jeanette, and I said, "Look, the entire world is going to be trying to get through to New York City on the phone, which means the phone lines are going to be jammed, and no one's going to be able to get through to me. So just call everybody and let them know that I'm okay."
Hmm.
And then I left, and I guess in all the excitement, they forgot, so nobody knew where I was, and I wasn't home.
Right.
Wow.
So I walked all the way up to 60 blocks, all the way uptown to make sure everybody was out, and got in the buildings and got them out, and then came to a gap I saw the first building fall, and that was I left the apartment, went over to Bleecker and LaGuardia, and I was looking around and looking at all the people around me, and I couldn't bear to get my camera out. I saw people shooting. I was like, how could you be doing this? But then all of a sudden, everybody around me all at the same time went, and I looked at them and I looked, and you saw the building coming down. At that point, I just took off because I knew I had to get up and get the guys. And I didn't know the second building had collapsed until I got out of that building and then looked down the street where you could usually see both buildings all the way, 40 blocks downtown. I'd walked 20 blocks at that point back toward home. And I asked someone who passed me, I said, did the second building come down? He's like, yeah, it came down. So, and then, and then the smoke and the smell of the burning, fuel and the rubber and the plastic, that stuff lasted for 3 months. We had to tape down our windows and tape underneath our doors at night. A lot of people just left. They shut off the streets down below, like Canal Street, and then Chambers Street, and then Houston Street. And so Canal Street was the last street that they had blocked off. There was all these young kids. They were, National Guardsmen, and they were nervous and edgy, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, and first time in the city. But I was with our cousin, Jim, our older cousin, Jim, and his son, who was living in New York at the time. And we all knew that they were going to pull the barricades and let people start walking down to the pile and to the site at noon. And so they pulled the barricades and nobody wanted to go first.
Right.
And all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see this guy in a big, like, white pants, big bald guy, kind of like long dashiki, kind of white long dashiki shirt. And on the front it said, "Walk with me." And on the back it said, "Walk with me." And I'm like, who is that guy? And I looked closely and I'm like, oh my God, that's Isaac Hayes.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So Isaac Hayes was the first one to turn past the barricade, and we all just walked with him and walked on down. And, and after that, just, did what we could, did fundraisers. And
wow. Did the city kind of shut down, for what, weeks after that?
Oh yeah. No. It was, it was different than during the pandemic, of course, because it was, there was politics and violence and death. There was obviously death here in the pandemic. Two of our hospitals, particularly like Elmhurst Hospital in Queens, just was completely overwhelmed. But it was different, because it was murder. And so there was so much anger on the street, and there was so much, just sadness and, families everywhere. Two guys from our block. We had no one in my building, luckily, but my local firehouse lost 11 on the day.
Wow.
They lost. There were 3 fires there was a fire in 1998. There was another fire in 2003, the Deutsche Bank fire, which happened because of September 11th. But between those 3 events, that one single house lost 16 men. And, it's, I always tell people to watch Rescue Me because like Dennis Leary was such a risk taker trying to find something funny, out of the madness and the anger that was. But it's still one of the best documents of the era, I think. How people were really feeling, and how much people were drinking, and how angry people were. And then, it kind of never went away, and then it seeped into our politics, and and of course it affected everything. It affected how the city responded to the pandemic. But it certainly made, the thing about New York in those times is that it can be an unbelievably fractured place, normally speaking, because it's every man for himself. It really is. You gotta, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. It's, you fight tooth and nail for every inch of everything in every business. But in those moments of stress, you really have the clarity of just what it looks like for a place with many millions of people to come together as one. And no place does it. Tear it up. no place does it like New York City. No place on earth comes together when something bad happens like New York. Stunning. Which of course, makes you so sad about how fractured it is the rest of the time. We've got all this political stuff happening right now with the migrants and idiocy from the governor of Texas making his juvenile statement, and it's causing all kinds of New Yorker against New Yorker stuff here, but not those other times.
That must have been an amazing time, kind of like the best of times and the worst of times and the best of times. When the people came together as a city to support each other. And
when New York comes together as one, it is a machine. It is it's a city that can't be beaten by anything or anyone. It's one of the great pleasures of living here is that the soul of this city, the identity that it has is just unmentionable. So and this is what I'm saying before, when people go, oh, New York City, it's that horrible place, that horrible city, I just walk away. I don't even talk to them anymore. Oh, I wouldn't live there. It's so dangerous. Well, everywhere is dangerous now. It's anywhere there's guns, it's dangerous. But it has been an utterly fulfilling place to live, and I'm glad I made the choice, to move here. I really, I'm here much more than half my life now. Let's see, I'm here in '86. I moved here when I was 22, so now I'm 61. So yeah, I'm here 40 years.
And it's a city that never sleeps, so there's always stuff to do, right?
Yeah, you gotta get to sleep though. No, it's if you're a young cat and you want to find something to do, or if you're looking for trouble, you'll find it. But,
yeah, I was in New York with my boss, and we walked around when the World Trade Center was just a hole, and we started to walk around it, and we couldn't get. It was so big, we couldn't get around it.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, people underestimate the girth of those buildings,
Yeah.
and also what was underneath. There were subways. There were 6 levels of subway underneath. There was that side of west of that road. That's all infill. Like as New York was being built and they picked up the bedrock, they moved it to the sides.
Right.
So Manhattan Island actually used to be a lot thinner than it is. So all that, everything that got pushed outward in both directions was all landfill. Like Battery Park, that area where the World Trade Center is.
Right.
That's all landfill.
Wow.
So the World Trade Center site, on the west end of it, in that hole, if you looked at it, there was a giant iron wall that they called the bathtub. And there was a time when that wall was threatened with possible collapse. And if it did, not the Hudson River was coming in, but a lot of water was coming in.
Right.
Because that's below sea level. I mean, that water was coming through. So that first thing they had to do was shore up the bathtub, and then they took advantage of it to rebuild as much as they could underground there and connect subway stations that hadn't been connected before with both the regional rail. Even in disaster, you certainly have to use the opportunity if you must. But they did, and with the exception of that horrendous building that sits on the site above the train station, everything else down there they've done a fairly good job with. My favorite things are the new Arts Center that's just going to be opening up soon. Just a square building. Take a look at it online. It's amazing. And there was an on the old Port Authority property just below, there was a Greek Orthodox cathedral, which was the head of the Greek diocese in New York City, and that building was destroyed in the collapse. So now they've put up a new one, and that should be opening again fairly soon. And that was after a long legal fight trying to stay on the land, because they either had a 99-year lease or they had a lease in perpetuity. But some good stuff came out of the rebuild.
Now let me ask you, what else can we see you in? I remember you were in the audience for the Greatest Showman on Earth, right?
Oh yeah, that was a great set. Boy, that was a hard set. Anytime you do period costume work,
Uh-huh.
especially for the women, it's extremely difficult because
Right.
it's just, those costumes are, if you're a woman, you've got to wear 100 different things and skirt hoops and um,
Girdles.
girdles and makeup and wigs and, you know, uh, men, the tight collars that chafe your neck and you're in a tuxedo, from the turn of the century for 18 hours. But a show like that, they had nothing but money to spend. All that stuff was new and newly made. Like,
Hmm.
man, like if you think those costumes look good, it's because they were real. Um,
Wow.
I don't know. I've worked on a little bit of everything. I've worked on every single TV show in New York as a background performer at one point or another in the last 5 years. Tons of movies. The Martin Scorsese movie that just came out. I did a day on that.
Oh,
Uh,
that's the one about the Indian tribe
yeah,
with
yeah,
the
yeah,
oil murders.
yeah. Look for me. There's a scene
Osage.
where. Hmm?
Osage, right? Is that the Indian tribe? Is it the Osage tribe?
Uh, I'm not sure which tribe it is. I never read the book.
Okay.
Um, I thought it was. For some reason, I thought it was the Oglala Sioux.
I'm not sure. I'm just trying to think of the name of the movie.
Oh. The name of the movie is uh, the Killers of the Flower Moon.
Right. That's right.
There's a scene where Leonardo DiCaprio comes out of a courtroom and gets into the back of a car, and then someone comes and talks to him in the back of the car before he leaves, and then a whole bunch of photographers there. I'm one of the photographers in there. Probably pretty easy to spot me. I think I was the only one that had a fake cigarette out of my mouth at the time. But stuff like that,
Right.
uh, where you get to watch Marty Scorsese work.
Yeah.
I've worked on a few of his other films. I've worked on every single film that's shot here in the summer from 2017 on. I worked on at one point or another.
Wow.
Worked a ton on The Gilded Age. Worked on Billions, of course. The benefit of that is that you're working on a different location, different style, different costume, different director. So you're really getting a sense of the you know how important it is to be able to bounce from type of production to type of production and be able to do it quickly.
Right.
The actors do, going from a big Hollywood thing to a period piece to a TV show and then on stage for a month in the summer. Um, but it's been fun. It's been fun.
How do you
And
get your gigs? Do you have an agent?
no. Background casting gets done through a third party. There's a group called Central Casting. Agent is for principal work. I haven't been able to find an agent yet. Um,
Okay.
my last agent died, and I haven't found a new agent since.
Right.
Now, background casting is all through. Unfortunately, it's through paid services, which it shouldn't be.
Right.
There's a database called Central Casting, both here and in LA, and then there are various background casting agencies, three or four big ones that handle most of the work here in New York. And so once
Right.
you get on their roster, you just work in rotation.
Okay.
In the old days, of the great Sylvia Fay, it actually was just alphabetical order. Your name would come up and like, all right, the S's are back.
Right.
Um, but there's a little bit of redundancy. Like when kids move here, they try and get background work, but they do all these paid services that actually use the database from these other clearinghouses. So there's really only two or three of them. So I tell them all the time, you just pay for the two that you need because the other ones are all you're getting the same listings twice. So
Right.
you don't want redundancy in what you're paying for. Um,
So you have to pay to play?
hmm?
You have to pay to play?
You have to. One of them, no. kind of the biggest, most important one, the one that gets me most work, my most work. Um, well, the two that get me the most work, one is not for pay, and the other one is.
Okay.
But but the one that is for pay is the main database, and that database is used by other groups. So that one, the biggest one, you have to be in it.
Right.
But you pay it off in one union workday. So
Right.
you know,
We-
especially if you get a little overtime.
We've been watching Only Murders in the Building,
Oh yeah,
and it's about the Arconia building.
yeah, which is actually an amalgam of two buildings.
Is it?
Yeah, well, there's a building called the Ansonia. There's a bunch of those big old giant buildings on the Upper West Side. There's one called the Belnord, and one called the Ansonia, and then another one called the I forget what the third one's called. But there are all these huge buildings that have these kind of carriage loops in the middle.
Uh-huh.
All buildings I worked in a ton as a window cleaner throughout the 80s and 90s, because all those buildings had belt work. They had safety harnesses.
Oh, okay.
But it's it's tangentially about any one of those buildings that has a co-op board with, and the boards are really like that. Like, the people are lunatic, and you're trying to keep people out, and I would never buy into a New York City cooperative building. I wouldn't do it.
Wow.
I remember one time, Pat, I came to New York and I went window washing with you.
Hmm?
And I think you took me up to about the 36th floor, and you put one knee out the window and then one knee in the window.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I did it, but I
Oh, I remember that. That was I remember the building because I had to. It was one of those buildings where we had to kind of hang out the side. And so I had to be inside, and I squeezed the window with my knee and leaned out and cleaned the window.
Right.
I remember where we were that day. That was I can't remember the name of the building. It's been a while, but that was at 36th Street and First Avenue.
Didn't a famous actor live in that building? Wasn't he in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids?
Tons.
Oh, okay.
Oh, well, that building, that was a different building. So we
Okay.
went to two buildings, because I took you to 36th and First, but the one at 67th in Amsterdam, yeah, that was the one where Rick Moranis lived.
Rick Moranis, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that was the building I told you about earlier. That was my first building,
Oh, wow.
and that was also the superintendent. That was back in the days when graft was still allowed in those situations. So the doormen, when they would have me come in, they'd be like, "All right, but I get 50 cents a window," and you had to pay it to get the
Really?
But that particular building was the worst of the worst. The superintendent of that building took a piece of everything from everybody. I had to pay him 50 cents a window back when we were only getting $1.50, $2 a window.
Is that the mafia?
No, just a building super. No, they knew you were a kid. They knew you needed money. They knew you had your student loans due. It's like, you want the building, you got to pay the piper.
Wow.
And then later on, another building superintendent who was friendly to me intervened and made it stop.
Nice.
So that was good. Oh my gosh, that's right. So you went to 67th Street. I remember that.
Yeah, I remember. I think you said you went on the outside. You said that's $10. You went on the inside. That's $10.
Yeah, yeah. That was after we finally started charging. Well, when you were there, we were up to about $6.50 a window.
Okay.
And but by that time, I had built, I had insurance, and it got expensive, and the supers and the boards of buildings required it. So they're like, all right, well, if it's going to cost you more, it's going to have to cost us more.
Right.
The window cleaning stories, I'll have to start telling them one at a time. But I'm still cataloging and digitizing all my old photos from those days.
Uh-huh.
So I may have a photo of you somewhere.
Yeah.
I have a great photo of your brother Matthew pretending to hang off the edge of a
I have
building,
that same photo.
where there was actually a floor directly below you, but it looked like it
Oh,
was.
okay. Yeah, I have that same photo.
We're gonna have to have you on again you know, you got so many projects and things. It's going to be cool to see, you know, what shows you're going to be in, and
where you are in a year. You know, I mean, you got the world at your fingertips, Pat.
Yeah, we'll definitely do. We'll definitely do when we release the film.
Okay.
Maybe.
And what's the name of the film again?
Working title, I think we're going to keep it, is Eagle Man and Wonder Woman: An America Love Story.
Okay.
They're really just stunning story. These two. It's really very endearing.
Great.
And they are much loved in the soccer world. And he also is an encyclopedic, has an encyclopedic knowledge of American soccer. And he wrote a book. I mean, he just finished a book on everyone who's ever scored a goal for the U.S. men's soccer team.
Wow. Ever
since the beginning of the program. And was able to interview quite a large number of them, some of them just before they passed away. So there's a lot going on. It's going to be a busy year. But right now, I got cabin fever. I'm on strike. I'm eager to get back to work. So I go hit the picket lines. I go over to Times Square, you know, on a Monday, and then over to Rockefeller Center on a Tuesday. So SAG-AFTRA, you know, we're picketing NBC, we're picketing Netflix, we're picketing Amazon. So I just go to a different strike line every day because it kind of gets boring to go to the same one all the time.
Wow.
Right.
Wow. Sounds like it's going to pay off.
Fingers crossed. If it works out like we think it's gonna, Writers Guild tonight, maybe tomorrow. So keep your hopes up. Work may be coming back soon.
Good luck.
Okay.
Well, Pat, I think we're going to wrap it up.
All right.
We appreciate you being on. Again, this is my brother, Patrick Shields. My name is Kevin Shields. This is Rich Burhell. And this is the Rich and Kevin podcast, version number 5.
Maybe next time we'll take you to somewhere specific in New York, like Coney Island, or we'll get granular next time.
Yeah, I can't wait.
All right. Love you, brother.
Love you too, Pat.
Good to see you
again, Richard.
You too, Pat.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, both.
Bye-bye.